But what I would say is that finding that overlapping area in which you're doing something that earns you a living and at the same time something that you enjoy is the overlapping area that you need to place yourself in.
I am an African. Africa, where it all began. The cradle of humankind. Rich in culture. Diversity of resources. The silver, the gold, and its people. Legacy, passing down something of value. Resources, ideas, information from one generation to another.
There cannot be any success in your lives without the willingness to live with what you regard as inconceivable.
African Legacy Project. They inspire and build.
As we reach the final episode of the African Legacy Project, our next guest is the very definition of legacy. He's a lawyer by training, a business icon, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a wise teacher, a great leader, a husband, and an amazing father. He also happens to be one of Africa's most richest men. Billionaire Hakeem Belo-Osagie, fondly known as HBO, shares his incredible journey and shares his legacy. This is African Legacy Project. May you all be inspired and build.
I am Hakeem Belo-Osagie. I'm chairman of Metis Captial Limited, chairman of Vitol, and chairman of Jabi Lakes Incorporated. Well, I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, in 1955. I say that I come from Benin City in Edo State, mainly because in Nigeria, you can be born in one place, but your state of origin is usually where your parents originally come from. But my earliest memories are actually when I was about 3 years of age, and those, funnily enough, were in England. And that's because when I was 3, my parents went to England to do further education. My father to move from being a doctor to a gynecologist. My mother, who was already a nurse, wanted to do further training so that she would become a sister. So I lived in England from the ages of about 3 till I was about 7 years of age, and then came back to Nigeria for primary school. There were very good parts of it, and there were some not so good parts of it. I stayed with a foster mother called Elizabeth Luckman, who I can still remember very clearly. She was a very dear and a very lovely English lady who had lost her husband in the Second World War. He was a fighter pilot, but she was a very dear and loving person. That was great. Obviously, there were some aspects of racial discrimination in the sense that some of the students there, some of the white students there were uncomfortable with you. Some of them didn't want to walk with you to and from school, and some of them were not very pleasant in school, but I think that was overshadowed by the affection and by the care that was shown to me by my foster mother and by her sons and daughters, who also were very kind to us. It also helps, of course, that my parents, though I was not living with them, were constantly in touch with us, visited us quite frequently, and still played their full parental roles. They were very loving. They set us very high standards. By the standards of the day, I would say they were very liberal, in the sense that they were not distant parents who were very reserved. They spoke with us, they talked to us, they mixed with us. They were very willing to explain to us why something should be done and why something should not be done. And therefore, they were not people who simply said to you, you must do this because I'm your father or I'm your mother, and that's the order. They were constantly encouraging. They were very good coaches, if I may say, and they made it very clear that there are certain standards that are expected of you in terms of your behavior, and you are expected to reach those high standards of behavior. They stressed tolerance very much, and we grew up in an environment which had both religions, both Islam and both Christianity were part of my childhood. We grew up in an environment in which you had all the ethnic groups mixed in our lives. So my parents had friends of theirs who were Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Kanuri, and it was very nice growing up in an environment that was multi-ethnic and multi-religion because it stressed to us the fundamental importance of tolerance towards people who may be very different from you. Your upbringing is, in many ways, your destiny. Let's just take, I would say, my attitude towards feminism or women's liberation, if I may call it that. As long as I can remember, my mother always worked. So I never really had the experience of a mother as a housewife. My mother was a nurse. She became a sister who ran the outpatients department of the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, which meant that she was at work from 7 o'clock in the morning until about 4 or 5 in the evening, afternoon, every day. So I grew up there seeing women as people who worked, who were independent, who were very able, who, yes, they were loving mothers, but they had careers of their own. And that definitely has had a huge impact on me because in the bringing up of my own daughters, I bring them up to have the same kind of aspirations as I bring up my son. It informs, I think, the way that I relate to my own wife, because I expect that my own wife will have her own ambitions with her own career, things that she wants to do with her life, because in a sense, that's what I saw when I was growing up in my parents. And in many senses, I've taken the same line as they have taken. And so I remember as a kid always wanting to grow up so that I could now do all the things that you were not allowed to do. As a child, you watch television, you look at your uncles and your aunts and people come in and out of the house, and you start thinking to yourself, what do I want to be? So I think that probably the first thing I really wanted to be was a lawyer. And I think that had to do with something to do with the fact that there was this television program called Perry Mason when I was a kid. And it was about this lawyer who always won all these cases, defending people who were innocent. And one of my father's best friends was a man called David Garrick. He had been at King's College, Lagos with my father, had gone on to Oxford University and was a lawyer. So I very much wanted to be like Uncle David, you know, a great lawyer who was like Perry Mason on television. And I think that was probably my very first ambition. And then I think it changed as I became older and as I went to secondary school. And I very much then wanted to be somebody who was going to work in the government because I very much admired, you know, the public servants who were trying to make Nigeria a better place. I think I felt very inspired by the leaders of Nigeria in those days, people like General Gawan, who I very much admired and looked up to, and then the senior civil servants like Mr. Alison Ayida, Mr. Philip Asiodu, Mr. Abdulaziz Atta. These were very much people that I looked up to, wanted very much to be like. And so my ambition or my thoughts moved more and more from the ambition to be a lawyer, but to be somebody who would be involved in serving Nigeria and becoming a public servant. And so I ended up applying to read a very interesting subject at Oxford University called Politics, Philosophy, and Economics, which had been the route that many people in England and in the British Commonwealth, including Nigeria, had studied on their way to becoming public servants. I loved the study of that subject, and the 3 years that I had at Oxford, reading philosophy, politics, and economics, I would say were amongst the most intellectually stimulating years of my life. And I think that I left there with a much better trained mind, much more thoughtful, understanding the importance always of a remorseless logic in the construction of any arguments that you're putting forward. And after I finished my time at Oxford, I then wanted to do 2 subjects, which I thought would give me a very practical hold or practical a sense within life. And those subjects that I picked were law, I guess back to the Perry Mason days, and business administration. And then I went on to spend the next 4 years of my life studying law and studying business administration. I think I was also very fortunate and very lucky in that I genuinely enjoyed a lot of the things that I studied in university, and I very much enjoyed my first job, which was in the government of Nigeria, working as a special assistant to the then presidential advisor on petroleum and energy. And so if you're in a job that you enjoy, in a subject matter that you also enjoy, you have a boss who is very understanding, very encouraging, with very high standards himself, then in many ways the distinction between having fun and being at dreary work breaks down, because you're really having fun in the area that you are working in. So you're having just a different kind of fun after work hours. And therefore I was very lucky to be in that situation. And it's not always that you can be in that situation. A lot of work is in fact dreary work and very repetitive work, and it's something that you have to do in order to earn a living. But I was very lucky to be able to do work that I very much enjoyed. It's interesting, do what you love and the money will follow, because it reminds me very much of one of the things that my father always used to say. He put it slightly differently. He used to say that in life there are 2 kinds of people. There are those people who run after money. And then there are the second people who have a certain skill. They're in a certain profession, and they're so good at that profession. They are so highly skilled. They do things so well that the money runs after them. And it was very obvious which of the 2 he hoped that you as a child would be. He definitely didn't want you to be in the section that were running after money. He wanted you to be in the section that money was running after them. So I very much follow my father's tradition, while realizing at the same time that it's not always as clear as that sometimes in life, you will not always be able to find the activity, the specific job that you love doing, and it may be that is something that simply doesn't earn enough for you to rent a house, educate your children, put food on the table, etc., 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 and therefore you often have to compromise. And with all things in life, it's about balance. It's about often not choosing between A and B, but finding a middle course. But what I would say is that finding that overlapping area in which you're doing something that earns you a living, and at the same time, something that you enjoy, is the overlapping area that you need to place yourself in. I worked as special assistant to two ministers, first Yahaya Diko and then Professor Tam David West. During that period when I was working in the government, there were two fundamental changes of government, two coups d'etats, and I was extremely fortunate that I was able to survive both of them, which was quite unusual during that time. And I think that by 1986, I'd been in the government for about 6 years at that time. It was quite clear to me that, or at least I thought that I wasn't going to, I needed a change in what I was doing. I was getting married. I needed something a little bit more stable. I had been in political positions for 6 years, and therefore I voluntarily left the government of Nigeria and decided that I was going to set up my own consulting firm. Now, years before then, my expectation was probably to have been in the government for 15 or 20 years and to leave the government maybe at an age of about 40 or 42 or 43 and then do something else. But I reassessed I reassessed my position and decided that I am now getting married. Obviously we plan to have children, and maybe this was a very good time to leave the government. I expected that at some point in my life I would go back to the government. But this was the time to try out some of the ideas I'd kind of developed while I was in the government as things that would be interesting to do within the private sector. And therefore I took the decision that I should set up my own consulting firm, which was called CTIC, which was going to advise major international companies that were going to do work in the business, in the oil industry. It grew phenomenally. It grew beyond my best expectations. I rapidly found myself advising, to be honest with you, more companies than I had the time to properly advise. Japanese companies, American companies, French companies, Arab companies. I really was not short of clients to have. In fact, the only thing that was puzzling was that for someone like myself who had spent about probably as long as 10 years of my life or 11 years of my life in England, I expected that I would have mainly English clients. But as it turned out, I didn't have any English clients at all. And all of my clients were from different countries. Now, it may be that that was the luck of the draw. It may be that the English clients felt that they already understood Nigeria, they already understood the oil industry and didn't really need someone like myself. But I must say that of all my clients, I think that the Japanese were probably my largest clients, and I had a tremendous and very positive experience working with them. I think that as I went down that path, I think that I'm a person who is restless. I think that's my nature. In some senses, I'm easily bored, and I like to do new things. And I think that I got to the stage in which I wanted and I hungered to be a principal. And so the only way I could become a principal was to try my hand at another industry. And the industry that was undergoing rapid change was the finance industry. And therefore I said, I'm going to try my hand at something in the finance industry, utilize the capital that I had made in the oil industry. It's important that I record that, and I speak frankly in saying that my very, very first venture into finance was in unmitigated disaster. It was a company called KMC, and we didn't do very well for many reasons. I always say to people that setback, painful as it was in those days, was extremely beneficial to me in the long term, because the act of failure, a setback, it inevitably causes you great pain, but at the same time, it makes you more resilient, tougher. It makes you confront what some of your weaknesses are. It certainly gives you a certain determination that you want to, in a sense, wipe this, I don't want to sound dramatic, wipe this stain off your record, or correct things, or do things again in a much better way. And so after that Kenneth Michael experience, KMC experience, I then, with a group of other folks, set up an organization called the First Securities Discount House, which was one of the first securities trading outfits in Nigeria, and which today is FSDH Merchant Bank. If KMC had been an unmitigated disaster, FSDH was a major success. And in many senses, that restored in me a sense that I could leave my chosen industry, the oil industry. I could go into another industry and I could do well in that area. And so in that sense, it was very comforting. After a while in that area, I then was very clear to me that there was an opportunity in that a lot of the very big banks who should have dominated this securities trading area were not there, partly because they were too old, partly because they were rather ossified, partly because they had become very inefficient. And I used to say to myself, my God, if anybody woke any of these big banks up, they would be a formidable competitor towards us. So I decided that I would look for an opportunity to acquire a larger bank. The decision by the government of Babangida to privatize banks, that is to sell the government banks to private owners, was the opportunity, and we took that opportunity. Human beings don't like change. So the challenge of United Bank of Africa was how to implement a change program that is required to save the bank, how to implement reforms in several different areas. How do you sequence these reforms? How do you bring in additional people who can help in the process of reform implementation? How do you disengage large numbers of staff in a humane manner without disrupting the services of the bank? And how do you do all of this in a market in which there are many other competitive banks? So that was the challenge. I think overall we largely succeeded, and I attribute that success to the fact that, as I said, apart from the core team at the very top, we were able to identify a lot of members of the old staff, the staff who had been in the bank for many years and who became convinced about the need for these reforms, working alongside a lot of the people that we brought in. And I think together, we really turned that bank around. And I would say that the turnaround of that bank, difficult as it was, controversial as it was, for me is one of the great, I think, successes of our time in the banking area. And I think that it was done without the express intervention of the government, whether it be through the police, the EFCC, the Justice Ministry, the central bank, none of whom were as deeply involved as they could have been, I think we did very well in being able to take these challenges by ourselves. I left UBA and then I started to work in two areas. One area was in real estate, and real estate was an area that I must confess I was never that excited about. It was an area that my wife was very interested in, and I'll just say it's one of those areas in which her very enthusiastic embrace of that area rubbed off on me. And I'm happy with the progress that we've made to date, which is that we have Abuja's largest supermarket mall overlooking the Jabi Lake, and it includes two of the largest supermarkets that are in Abuja as well. I also at that time went into telecommunications, and a group of us brought in the Abu Dhabi investors that, working with Nigerian investors, started the company that's called Etisalat Nigeria. Both of the ventures have been challenging ventures. I would have liked very much to have gone faster with the real estate development than we have gone, but I think that we still have a long way to go, and I'm very happy and satisfied with what has taken place so far. I expect and I hope to build hotels, offices, and residences in that piece of land that is adjoining the mall. But if we can do in those other areas as well as we've done on the mall, which I think most people would say is not only efficient, but it's also a mall that aesthetically is very pleasing to the eye, that's very clean, and gives people a very good shopping experience. If you can do as well in the other areas as we've done in the mall, then I'll be extremely happy indeed. First of all, I would say to you that I haven't always done well. There are business setbacks that I've had, and I think that I should say these things very frankly. I did mention that there was a financial services venture called KMC that I was involved in that did not go very well. But what I have said is that, and what I do maintain is that when this has happened, that I've done my best to pick myself up and to move on. And I have found that that as what's the saying, as one door closes, another door opens. You learn the lessons from what went wrong, you improve upon them, and you do something even better going forward. So I need to put that on the table right away. In terms of common threads to it, yes, I do like challenging situations. Yes, there's certain approaches I have, and it tends to be get together a group of outstanding individuals, irrespective of whether they're men or women, irrespective of what ethnic group they come from, but get together a core team of people who are very able. Understand and learn the nature of the business that you're in, and understand it very thoroughly, which means don't go into it simply because everybody else is there, but truly get to the bottom of what drives this business, where is value to be created, what makes for success there, where is the money to be made in this business, and how do you go about this? Have a complete understanding of that, and then be willing to take the risks that come with it, with all businesses, and then have the resilience to make the changes which will happen because there's some things that you've read wrong. There's some new circumstances that will be imposed on you. There's some things that are going to happen differently from what you expected. And therefore, there are going to be some setbacks, and therefore there are going to be some adjustments that you need to make. And there's some recalculations that you need to do. Once I think you have that resilience, there are very few challenges that you cannot overcome. And so I don't believe in magic touches. I believe in a combination of willingness to take risks, capital, a very, very good team, thorough knowledge of the market, and of course, good old lady luck. These, I think, are the main components. I look at myself, and I can't but remember some of the great teachers, some of the great professors that I've had the privilege of studying under. I can't forget the teachers and the professors who have said things that have struck me, and they've encouraged me, and they have made a huge difference to my life. And I can't also forget those teachers and professors who have been great mentors. Some of them, they've mentored me without realizing that they've mentored me. Either it's the force of the examples, or it's in the books that they have read, or they have written and I have read, or it's in the way they have approached life themselves. And so I think a great part of me is the saying that to those to whom much is given, much is expected. And what I think I've tried to do is, having seen the impact that education has had on my life, say to myself, wouldn't I want to provide that same environment, some of these opportunities to other people as well? And I would like to say to you that there is nothing that is more enjoyable than to have provided a person with an educational opportunity, to see them enjoy that opportunity, and to see them come out of that opportunity a more thoughtful person, a more skilled person, and then to watch them go on to do great things themselves. The African Leadership Academy is one institution that has made such a tremendous difference to the lives of young people. I'm extremely proud to be associated with that. I would say that I've learned many lessons from her. We are very different personalities. I think that she's a much more methodical person than I am, much more conservative than I am, and a person who is much more cautious than I am. And so I think that I've learned a lot about that approach, because I tend to be much more risk-taking, much more willing to go with the flow. I have my great enthusiasms, and I tend to charge ahead. And therefore, I think that I've learned a lot from her caution, her method, to be be more careful, more willing to think through the downside of things, and therefore be more ready when things don't go the way I expect them to go. There are several aspects to it, to building a family, at the same time being successful in the workplace. But I think that what's important for all people to recognize is that it's not just the mother's job. If there's one thing I want to leave you with, is that it's a job, it takes two, at least two, a father and mother to bring up children, and that oftentimes for us men, we leave it to the mothers, and our attitude is that if it succeeds, if they do well, it's our accomplishment. If it fails, it's the mother's fault. So I think that the beginning point has to be a commitment that time spent, emotional energy spent, time thinking through things spent in bringing up children and in developing a relationship with your spouse, that they are as important. Now, it's often the case, and I think that all of us who are reasonably successful professionals or business people, that takes a certain amount of our time and energy. And it often happens by default that we then give to the family and to your marriage, what's left after that has been taken away or after that has been exhausted? And I think that you constantly have to remind yourself that if you don't make the investments in time, if you don't make the investments in emotions, if you don't make the investments in thinking through what to do in a very calm manner in both the bringing up of children and in both having a happy marriage, it's not going to just happen by default. And therefore, I'm not sure that there's a magic formula in doing all three together, except to say it's something that you need to invest in, devote time in, recognize its importance, and at all times absorb the lessons that are around you from seeing those circumstances in which things have gone wrong and hoping that you can do your best in making sure that things go right for you. I think that, and I don't say that she's necessarily my role model, but I think that, I think Jackie Kennedy was once asked the question, what's the greatest thing that she thinks she's done? And you married the President of the United States, you married an exceptionally rich man, what are you very proud of? And she said that one of her great things that probably makes her proud than anything else is bringing up 2 normal children. And I would say that, honestly and sincerely speaking, yes, I have a certain pride about some of my academic accomplishments, some of my business accomplishments. But I think that for most people, and I'm definitely there, it is seeing your children grow up to be thoughtful, intelligent people, yes, successful in academics, but at the same time, to be people whose character, whose sense of justice, a sense of kindness, a sense of politeness, a sense of grace has been fairly well developed. There are a number of things that I can extract from what I've seen, what I've experienced, that I'd like to share to a younger generation that will inevitably be taking over. And they should be taking over sooner rather than later. And their responsibility will be the transformation of Africa. The first is there must be restraints on individualism. That is that while I find a lot of people are very able, very hardworking, very gung-ho, there's nothing significant that is achieved without the group and without the team. And if they are going to make the difference that we hope they will, they've got to go beyond themselves as individuals and instead think teams, think groups, and have that willingness to subordinate their short-term, narrow self-interest for the interests of the team or the group, through which so much will be done that is successful. That's the first. The second is that, and I say this in particular for Nigerians, Kenyans, South Africans to some extent, always remember what has happened in places like Rwanda in particular, and that is that we must always, and they must always, grow above ethnic divisions, They must always go above religious differences. They must always go above regional differences. And they must understand that if some of these differences were understandable in their grandparents' generation, because their grandparents grew up in a town or in a village, and therefore they had an acutely developed sense of the outsider who was strange or different from them. For the younger generation of today, there can be no strangers. And therefore, their approach to life has to be one that is encompassing, so that we do not have the continuing problems of ethnic warfare, and we don't have the continuing problems of the religious differences that are often now being described as the center of a lot of our issues and our problems. The next generation, if they're going to transform Africa, they must rise above that. Third thing I'd like to share with that generation is that I grew up with a sense of government, the engine of growth. It was all aspirations were to be achieved through government. The public service was the highest service that you could aspire to be involved in. We've moved now to one in which our concerns are very private. Our heroes are wealthy businessmen. The people that we look up to are who is the richest, who has most money, who has built the biggest businesses. Now, I think that it's necessary in your generation to, in a sense, to rebalance, to appreciate that the person who builds or is part of the building of a public school system, the person who contributes to a public health system that ensures that the poor, that the low income, that the medium income can get, I hate to use the word, but affordable health care, that the contributions that they make are going to be as central, if not more central, to the transformation of the economy than what businessmen are going to do, are going to make, that you understand that, and that you embrace that. And that as some of you, as you grow, will want to be the great businessmen who deliver goods and services at cost-effective prices across the continent. This is my hope that at the same time, within your generation, there are those who place at the center of your concerns, and as the area in which you want to be intensely active, are those areas of education, the areas of health, and the areas that can deliver public goods to the entire population. There's a saying that there are only two things in life that you can be sure about: death and taxes. I think that statement probably remains as the one thing that you can be absolutely sure about. On a more serious note, no, I shouldn't say on the more serious note. Another thing I think I would say you can be very sure about is that in life you will always have what they say, there will always be curveballs in life. There will always be things in life that take you by surprise. There'll be highs, there'll be lows. You will have great successes, you will have great failures. You will have times of sadness, you will have times of great happiness. And the important thing in your lives, I think, is to be able to face each one of them with a sense of equanimity, with a sense of calm, not being over-worried when you have your setbacks, and avoiding that larger-than-life feeling that you often have when things go very well. I don't think it's possible to talk about one's legacy. I think that is something that honestly other people have to say. And they've got to say, what did they get from you? And sometimes, your legacy is different from what you hoped it would be. All I can hope for is what I say whenever I'm invited to give a talk to university students or to graduate students, and it is, to repeat the mantra that I want to be remembered not so much by the specific businesses that I built, not so much to be remembered by how much money I left behind, but instead to be remembered by the generation after me as someone who you did your best, you inspired them to do even better, and that you provided by your example, by your deeds, by your words, by your speeches, you provided them a source of encouragement, a source of inspiration that made them feel that they could do extraordinary things themselves, even in those circumstances where they did not have all of the privileges that other people had in their lives.